Hi and welcome back to Pro Shop. It's Pete here, and today in this video I want to take you through the first part of the build of this rat rod. Okay, so in my last video, I asked if anyone knew what type of car this was, and no one could guess it. A few good guesses, but no one could guess what this was. When this car arrived, I actually had no idea what it was. I was told it was a 32 Ford Roadster, and I just went along with it. And it wasn't until I was fitting these doors, I bought a set of hinges for a 32 Roadster, and they didn't fit. They didn't work at all. Well, I had to make them work. So then I rang up the owner and I said, "Are you sure this is a 32 Ford? Because all the parts we're buying, nothing seems to work." So he did a little bit of research and come back and said that this was actually a 1930 Willy's Whippet roadster. This is actually a pretty rare car. It was the third biggest car manufacturer in the world at one time. The Whippet name came because this was actually the fastest production car for under $1,000. And in the late 1920s, I think it was, it set a record of 58 miles per hour. So the story behind this car was that my mate found it in a paddock. Original, not much was left of it, starting to rust away. He brought it back to his workshop, and he wanted to turn it into a rat rod. He had a lot of spare parts laying around, motors, superchargers, airbagged, full link out of a Hilux. So he decided to chuck it all together and make a rat rod. He started by lengthening the front chassis. He put a C-notch in the rear, fitted the motor, which is a Ford 302 Windsor. Then he got to a point where he needed me to do the floors in it. Before I could do the floors, I had to build an entire internal structure. Now, originally there would have been a timber frame that the body was built around, however that would have rotted out a long time ago. So we curved box sections of steel to follow the shape of the body for the body to be mounted to. Then I built an internal structure to hold the panels in place. Once the body was secure, I could fit the doors and get them swinging. Before I started on the floors, there were a few rust patches to fix first. With this car being almost 100 years old, the body wasn't too bad. Both doors were fine. The front section needed a couple of patches on both sides at the bottom, and the rear end corners had almost completely rusted away. But luckily there was just enough original metal left for me to know how much to build it to. I fabricated sheet metal door trims to cover the frame and also mount the handle to. I followed the line in the dash through into the door trims and eventually around the inside of the whole car. This was the starting point of the simple pattern I bead rolled into the floor and surrounding panels. I started on the floor sections by first making paper templates before moving on to making the tunnel. The rear wall and side sections were first made from cardboard before I transferred it to steel. With them all trimmed and sitting in place, I could mark them, swage them, and once back in, finally weld it all in place. It was easier for me to make a new boot lid than to repair the old one. I just made the panel, wrapped it around the frame, welded on some new hinges, and it was done. Then inside the boot area, I had to make a new shut section for the seal to sit on. The old front end was removed to make way for a new weld-in crossmember, fitted with tubular arms, Commodore brakes, and new rack and pinion steering. Usually these would come with coilovers, however we ditched them so we could fit the new shockwave airbags. To get this car sitting flat, I had to raise the crossmember and notch the steering into the chassis, then I finished off the front end by fabricating up new chassis horns. Next I went on to fitting the radiator. An old 31 Ford radiator grille was found at a local swap meet. It had seen better days, but it was perfect for this build, and I took it back and fabricated a frame for it to mount to. By making a cardboard template of the size of the radiator I wanted, I then sent it out to my local radiator shop, Radiator Warehouse, where they made this beautiful copper radiator for me. Once I got it back, I fitted it to the surround, mounted the thermofan, and bolted it back onto the car. Even though we didn't want to, legally we have to have some sort of guards covering the wheels. So I ordered a set of guards and customised them to fit as close to the tyre as possible. The rears were mounted to the diff housing to follow along with the suspension, and the front mounted to the hubs so they turn with the steering. Seeing that the chassis sits flat on the ground, there was no way the exhaust was going to fit under the car, so I decided to run it along the outside of the body. I curved a section of 3-inch pipe that follows along the body, under the rear wheels and out the back of the car. With a 4-into-1 collector tacked at the start, I began building the extractors. While these pipes were probably the easiest to build because there was really nothing in the way, they had their difficulties. Firstly, they are fully seen, so the perfectionist in me had to get them right. Plus, both sides could be seen at once, so they had to be symmetrical. Once I had the pipes tacked in place, I pulled it apart, fully welded and sanded them smooth. Now I could tack them back in position and finally finish the welding. Welding the final pipe into the collector is always difficult, so I cut a section out, welded it on the inside and then put the piece back in. After a quick sand, no one would ever know. Now, with the majority of the fab work done, it was time to pull the body off and finish cleaning up the chassis. It was strengthened and boxed in, I fabricated brackets for the air tank and valve block to sit on. Engine mounts were also strengthened and boxed in, along with all the cross members. All unwanted holes welded up, and finally I had to grind and sand it smooth. Then, after a coat of metal clear, I could put it all back together again. This has been a great build to do because while my mate has had some idea of what he wanted, he's really left a lot of the design up to me. And as usual, I've fallen in love with this car and it's going to be hard to see it go. But he did say that if I get it finished by the end of the year, I can take it to Summernats. So fingers crossed for that. So there's a few other things to do. Got to mount the seats, seat belts, gauges, fuel system, brake lines, and then get the whole thing wired. But I'll save that for another video. So if you like this video or any other videos on this channel, make sure to subscribe. If you have any questions, leave a comment. And if you want to know when the next video comes out, hit the little notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching.